Hello everybody, welcome back to the WTF1 podcast. As you can see, I'm wearing a WTF1 beanie because my mullet is an absolute mess. Tommy, how is your hair doing and at what stage will you start wearing hats?
I'm not normally a hat guy, but I'm very much needing a haircut soon and very concerned about doing it because I do not like having short hair. Very short hair.
But that's not what we're going to be discussing today. Is in fact not even a real-time newsy topic thing, which we usually talk about sort of stuff that's been going on in the world. But today we're going to be talking about the most underrated driver, both in history and also on the current grid as well. So we have to have two picks. I have a pick, Tommy has a pick, and we've also asked for your picks as well. So we'll be running through some of the top suggestions and discussing it, won't we, Tommy? I'm sure we'll disagree as we go on. But are you looking forward to this?
Should be good. There's not much news to talk about, so we're doing something different.
Okay, let's dive in straight away with the current choice, the one that we thought was most underrated on the grid at the moment. Now, I'll go with mine, Sergio Perez. 8 podiums. The man's been very consistent. Obviously, he had the call up to McLaren very early in his career. He didn't perform. You can't really argue against it. But there's been many times where drivers have gone up, haven't they? Like they've been promoted too early. I mean, we've had Gasly only recently. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he'll never be a good driver or never became a good driver, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you could argue that perhaps he got his big shot at a top team just as McLaren were. Unfortunately, dropping down the order. 2013 wasn't the best time to go. It was the last year that McLaren, the 2012 was the last year McLaren won a race. So he joined at exactly the wrong time he could have done.
Yeah, and that was where his career could have potentially ended. But fortunately for him, he went to the midfield teams and he's been able to perform especially well at what was Force India, now Racing Point. A few fans at ADN_YT also said Sergio Perez, 8 podiums for Force India and Sauber is definitely incredible. Malaysia 2012, I mean, what a race that was. That was when he was hounding down Alonso, wasn't it? And we all thought he was going to win. And then it turned out he made a mistake around the second to last corner and there's been all sorts of conspiracy theories, isn't there?
Yeah, because obviously, if you remember at the time, that was when Sauber had Ferrari engines, and Sauber were very much reliant on Ferrari engines at that time, an independent team. Don't believe it's a conspiracy myself, but they did radio Sergio. Quite understandably, it was a huge result for Sauber to get P2, and they radioed him and said, think about this carefully, Sergio. Maybe hold back, don't risk anything, I think they said. Can't remember the exact words. And unfortunately, them saying that triggered him into a mistake just as he was catching Alonso for the lead.
Yeah, strange how that would have been. Being told to be careful or not go for the overtake and he makes the mistake, which is a bit strange. And yeah, I think that's one of the conspiracy theories I can slightly get on board with. I don't know, I just feel like maybe there is something there, but we'll never know, will we? We just have to go on our own suspicions. But yeah, that was an unbelievable race, and that was when Perez really kind of was on the radar, wasn't he, for some teams. And there was always those links, wasn't there, to potentially going to the big teams after McLaren, but it never really came through.
Yeah, it was weird actually, because he was a Ferrari junior, and so he'd joined the Ferrari junior team, and he was very much like he was going to essentially one day be promoted to the top team, a bit like Charles Leclerc now, for example, starting at Sauber and then moving up. But unfortunately, he didn't have the spot, and then, he ended up in McLaren. He chose McLaren. He went against Ferrari, waiting for that opportunity, joined McLaren in the end. Unfortunately, despite an incredible 2012 season where he was getting podiums, he could have won a few races that season. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for him.
Yet to get his first maiden victory. At V Lion Man also said Sergio Perez, he always seems to get the most out of the car and has developed a way to always get podiums when the top teams make mistakes. I think that's the key thing, isn't it? The amount of podiums he's been able to get in a car that never really deserved it. And whenever it's a crazy race, Baku or whatever, he's always there or thereabouts. You expect him to be near the front, making the most of when everybody else trips over each other. And that in itself, as much as people might go, he was in the right place at the right time, there's drivers like Hlkenberg that never got a podium.
It's crazy to think he's driven for McLaren, never got a podium for McLaren, but ended up with 8 podiums from Force Indias and Saubers. It's Pretty crazy.
It's the wrong way around, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Right, Tommy, give us your pick.
Okay, so for the record, my pick was probably going to be Perez too. So I'm going with my second choice, which is Romain Grosjean, which I know will be
Tell us more.
A bit controversial, perhaps.
Bit controversial, but I guess if you knew of Grosjean in his earlier careers in Lotus, you can understand why
exactly
you'd put him up there.
And, I'm not going to pretend that we haven't roasted him a bit on the podcast when he's had a bad race, because he's not been having the most decent recent time of things. Particularly last year, he was poor. I would go to admit he was poor that season, but he is a good driver, and obviously the Haas was not in a good place last year. But when he has had those opportunities, Grosjean is the kind of driver that I think if Haas get their shit together, I think Grosjean would be the guy that grabbed them a podium. And he's got 10 podiums to his name, which is pretty impressive for someone that gets sort of slated as one of the worst drivers in Formula One. That's a lot of podiums to score.
Yeah, he had a very good run, didn't he? It was after the big crash he had, wasn't it?
So
on that decent run.
Yeah, I was looking back at his results. So you'd argue 2009, it wasn't really a full season where he just joined when he replaced PK after Crashgate, but his first proper full season alongside Raikkonen at Lotus. 2012 was obviously overshadowed by his race ban with the Spa crash. But even then, he was scoring a lot of podiums. And by the end of 2013, I had a look back and I remember him being really good at the end of 2013. And look back and he scored, in the last 6 races, scored 4 podiums. He was rapid.
Yeah, so it might have just been that era, though. You never know that, obviously, with things having changed now, whether it's case of the hybrid engines, and there's always talk about that and how it suits particular driving styles and even the car itself, so yeah, definitely. Well, Grosjean, for sure, we have absolutely roasted him of recent, but he's deserved it. But
there's no doubt he's not been great, but he had a great career as well on his way to F1. He won the F3 title, he won the GP2 Asia title, he won the GP2 title. So similar to George Russell in that sense, that he was, this really quick kid that everyone really rated, and he got that chance at Lotus and he was really good. And the thing is with these overrated, underrated, it is, at the end of the day, it is all opinion, because Formula One is a very unique sport where you have to have the right car to perform. So realistically, like Sergio Perez, you never know if he's going to, you could give him the Red Bull tomorrow and he might not be great, but based on what he's been doing in a Force India and Sauber and stuff, you'd say he is underrated. So Grosjean's one of those drivers too.
Different kinds of underrated, aren't they? In the sense that Perez has always been one of those that, as I said a minute ago, performs in these strange climates or whatever that's going on in the race, whereas Grosjean just had a period in his career where he had a decent car and he was able to perform to the level of which, that was the year that Kimi Raikkonen won Abu Dhabi, wasn't it?
In 2012.
So they clearly had the car to perform, and Grosjean did a great job. I don't know if right now, if I could put him as one of the top ones in terms of currently underrated. I feel like
in terms of if he retired, he would be underrated for me. But if you look back on his career, he's been a lot more impressive than maybe he's due credit for. So that's why I put him in my list.
At Hey_Elliot also says Romain Grosjean, hugely impressive career in lower formulas, a very talented driver, but has never really been talked too much. I wouldn't agree. In a negative way.
Yeah.
And at AMS_Dasher said Romain Grosjean as well. I know the best case scenario is that this gets ignored, but the guy is one of the most unlucky in the grid for sure. Whenever he was doing well last year, there was always something that happened. He has the speed, just not always the consistency.
Yeah.
We'll see. Maybe if Haas get their act together, although it seems like it could go completely the other way by the sounds of the finances and whatnot with all this stuff that's going on in the world right now. Hope you guys are staying safe, just as a side note, because obviously things are still crazy. But yeah, we don't know. We don't know where Grosjean's career is going to go. Obviously, he's towards the tail end of his career, you have to say now. How old is he?
34, 35, something like that. So,
He hasn't got much time to... Well, I don't think he's ever going to get a top drive now, is he?
No.
It's a shame. It's a shame, but at least he has 10 podiums to his name. He has some silverware.
I think he's one of those drivers where it is very much with a lot of these underrated drivers, I guess, is what might have been. What might have been if we didn't. He had that tail end of 2013 where it's absolutely phenomenal. I'll go as far as saying that he was the only one that could almost challenge Vettel when he was dominating in that Red Bull, where he was like best of the rest. And unfortunately, huge rule change and Lotus drop right to the back of the field and he doesn't really have a chance. But even then he scored a podium for them. So yeah, still a great driver, I think.
Definitely. I think the term underrated just gets thrown around so much on social media, whatever sport it is or whatever, people don't seem to really understand what underrated means. And it's very strange when the likes of Vettel gets put in the sort of arena of being underrated. It's very strange. But yeah, I think definitely Grosjean can be seen as underrated, especially from his earlier parts in his career. Now, another one was Carlos Sainz. This is fan picks now.
Yep.
Podium, obviously, he has one after Brazil last year. At F1 McLaren fan says he quietly gets it done, scoring maximum points, and the TV cameras never seem to see it. And at ads_online says Sainz, since he was first teammates with Verstappen, I thought they were just as talented as each other. People are just catching on now. Yeah, I think Sainz was more probably underrated earlier on in his career when he was up against Verstappen. Now I feel like he's probably getting the praise
credit
he deserves.
Yeah,
it's just I guess that people maybe jump on that underrated bandwagon because he's not shown on television.
Yeah, I wrote that in my notes. So the only person that doesn't seem to rate him is the F1 broadcaster, it seems. But yeah, Sainz is a interesting one because personally, I will be the first to admit that I didn't really rate him when he was before this season. I kind of thought, he was in the Renault, he wasn't doing anything that spectacular. And yeah, he had some good performances alongside Verstappen, but he just missed that spark, that Verstappen has, that a Hamilton has, that an Alonso has, where, call it arrogance, call whatever you like, but they've got that kind of ruthless spark, if you like. And Sainz, I feel, didn't have that. But he's definitely proved a lot of doubters, including myself, wrong. And last year was just phenomenal. You just can't fault him for what he did last year.
No, absolutely not. And, he missed out on the Red Bull hot seat against Verstappen. It was very close. I'm surprised that you didn't rate him when he was up against Verstappen, considering he was up against your boy.
He did all right. I think people think he did better than he did, maybe, like in terms of like points and stuff. But when it was those races where, from what I remember, Verstappen getting kind of like a P4 in Hungary, and he was the one putting in maybe more exciting moves and stuff.
Yeah,
but maybe
so
you just
maybe
more
we just
of a
didn't see
showstopper,
more of a camera spotlight kind of guy.
Yeah, maybe we just didn't see Carlos Sainz in the Toro Rosso because the director wasn't showing him,
and no one noticed because Sainz was new at the time. Who knows? But yeah, I think Carlos Sainz is definitely a shout. But as I say, I don't think he's probably in that the most underrated driver on the grid, because people have been screaming his praises for the whole of last season pretty much. So not completely, not contesting at all that Sainz isn't a great driver, because he is. But I think that people are probably understanding that now.
Yeah.
Right, next one. Lance Stroll. I think Lance Stroll's definitely in the mix as someone that can be deemed as underrated, and a few of you agreed as well. Tommy_2808 says Lance Stroll because everyone just sees his father buying his seat, but apart from qualifying, he's a really strong driver. And at WizKid I'd probably pick Stroll. Has an absolutely amazing junior career, has a podium, and really the only weaknesses he has is qualifying, which needs to be fixed. But people just see him as daddy's cash and nothing more. I think, for people that, definitely underrated probably is one of the key things for Stroll, because of this negative connotations that he kind of carries with the fact that there's no denying that he has that Racing Point seat because of his dad.
Yeah.
But his results, excluding qualifying, which I'll put my hands up, I was roasting him myself last year for his terrible qualifying, because he didn't get a Q1 for God knows how many races, considering he's in a Racing Point.
Yeah.
But his races were pretty solid, and you can't say that he was just trundling around 17th or 18th, was he? He was making moves.
Exactly. He's got the reason he's underrated for me is because he does have that reputation of he's only in Formula One because of his dad. And don't get me wrong, that is obviously a huge part of it. But the reputation that he has almost is like he's a 90s pay driver that's 5 seconds off the pace, like a Raghunathan or something, and wouldn't even qualify in the 107% rule. When realistically, he's just very, very poor at qualifying. And when he's in the mix, he's a quick racer, and he's got a podium, let's not forget. It's a crazy race, but we mentioned with the Perez thing, Hlkenberg never got one, and Stroll, managed to do it when he was given that opportunity. So fair play to him.
Fair play indeed. Yeah, I think Stroll's definitely a shout. Yeah. Probably still behind his teammate, I would say, in terms of underratedness. And however you measure it, I know a lot of people will probably measure it in different ways, but in my head, I still think Perez is slightly more underrated in terms of what he's achieved and what he gets in terms of coverage. Another person is George Russell. At Hunter Manley says, F2 and GP3 world champion and insanely quick, often overlooked because he drives for Williams, but I see him getting the next seat at Mercedes. I don't think he's underrated. I just don't. No. He just doesn't get any spotlight because of the fact he's in the Williams. But I think within the paddock, I think the understanding of a lot of fans that George Russell is one of the next contenders for a title, for sure. I just think that why would people talk about someone that's trundling around 19th at the moment, but it's the same for Alonso when he was at Minardi or whatever. It's too early in his career for him to be deemed as underrated, I think.
100%. It's what I've written in my notes as well, so get out my head. But yeah, I wrote this one down because a lot of people put it, but for me, it doesn't fall under that underrated category because, if anything, he's a highly rated driver that we've just never seen in a good car, or even a car that's capable of competing with anyone. Like we need to see George Russell, even if it's in a midfield car, to see how he's performing. Because everyone, in my opinion, he is highly rated because he won F2 as a rookie. He won GP3, I think, as a rookie as well. And, he's done some unbelievable things in the junior category, and he is so highly rated that Mercedes have hired him, even though he's in a Williams. And we just need that. We need to see him in a top car to see if we can truly see if he's underrated or not. He needs a longer career, really, before you can give him a label.
Agreed. I think we can move on from the Russell conversation straight to Valtteri Bottas as another pick from quite a few of you. One of them being _JasonF1 saying, Valtteri Bottas, even in the best car, you don't win multiple races unless you have serious talent. If Lewis really is a GOAT contender, no shame in being beaten by him.
I'm sat on the fence about this one, really. I don't think he's as bad as what maybe a former Bottas Basser used to say on this podcast.
Bottasher.
Yeah. But I don't think he's underrated. He deserves to have a few wins in F1. But for me, he's nothing special. And if anything, he's getting 7 wins in a Mercedes for however many years he's been with them now. 3 seasons. It's not that huge, is it? Not that
special, is it?
If he was really underrated, which we'll go into later about kind of number 2 drivers, if you like, that have maybe been overshadowed by a greatest of all time contender teammate, Bottas doesn't, for me, pick up enough wins and has incredible performances to warrant that.
Yeah, exactly. Even if we're going to call Lewis the GOAT, Lewis is always going to have off weekends, and that's when Bottas is going to shine. And 7 wins in 3 seasons. If anything, I would say that if you look at Bottas's career, he was probably more overrated when he was at Williams than he was underrated.
Yeah,
everyone's thinking that Bottas is this next big thing. He's really performing
like a wonder kid,
Massa, but he gets the step up to the big seat, and he has shown glimpses of talent, sure, and he's been commended for that. But I don't think he's underrated by any stretch. I think he's just about on the level of where he is in his career, which is a second driver.
And he doesn't, basically. Yeah, exactly. And he doesn't seem like the kind of wonder kid, maybe like a George Russell, where if he was Lewis's teammate, you think it would be almost a stepping stone to be number one driver eventually. Whereas if Lewis Hamilton retired tomorrow, I don't believe that Valtteri Bottas would be given a number one treatment and they put a number two driver in to help him win the championship.
Absolutely not, and that's testament with his 1 year contract extensions.
Exactly,
that's all he's getting, isn't it? Mercedes don't believe in him particularly, unless he steps up his game a huge amount. I don't think, as you say, number one is not on the cards for him. We interrupt this WTF1 podcast very briefly to speak about our sponsor for this episode. You may have heard of them before if you're a regular listener. It's ExpressVPN. If you don't know what ExpressVPN is, it's a software that thousands upon thousands of people use every day to protect our data online. In the time since we've started using ExpressVPN, hacking methods have grown even more sophisticated. And I'm sure a lot of you are working from home these days in the current climate and without the IT department to protect you from online threats. So it's important that you take action on your own to secure your devices you use for work. That's why I recommend using ExpressVPN for the best online protection possible. You might be thinking that security threats don't affect you personally or it doesn't affect your phone or whatever you use, but not using ExpressVPN is like leaving your front door unlocked every time you go out. Sure, nothing might not happen for years, but when it does, it can be devastating. One of the easiest ways to secure your internet data is with ExpressVPN. You click one button on your computer or smartphone and you're protected. So make sure you protect your data today by visiting our special link, which is expressvpn.com/WTF1 and get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. That's expressvpn.com/WTF1. Right, back to the podcast. Right, let's move on to the most underrated drivers in F1 history now. And my choice, which might surprise a few people, is Nico Rosberg. Now, I've been critical, especially when Rosberg retired. People have seen that. But
what was that?
Let's not get into that. But I think my reasoning for this is that we never really knew how good Rosberg was until he left the sport and until even Bottas stepped up to the plate, in my head anyway. And this is, by the way, is a choice from when I've been watching and where I feel comfortable in order to measure it up. I'm not going to go into the 70s, 80s, 90s even to go, X, Y, and Z, because I'm not a historical F1 fan. I'm more in the now. So for me, in the last 10 years or so, I'd say Rosberg is definitely a shout for sure. There are a few other contenders which we'll get into, but for me, he was on the pace of Hamilton most times. There were obviously a few times where we were thinking, well, God, if Red Bull or Ferrari was closer in performance, then Rosberg would be fifth or sixth rather than second. But I think he had Hamilton's number more than anyone we've really ever seen, and that's why he has a title.
Yeah, I think going back to Bottas, like you say, Bottas has almost proved, wow, Nico was really quick. And I'm one of those people that believes he was very fortunate to win the title in 2016. Maybe very fortunate is unfair. He pushed Hamilton a lot, and I do believe that without those failures, Hamilton would have won the title. However, he pushed Hamilton a lot during his career at Mercedes, and the fact that Rosberg could get in Hamilton's head, something Bottas just hasn't been able to do at all. It shows just how good Nico Rosberg was, and I'm with you. I wasn't a huge fan of him personally, but when I was reading some of the comments of people saying Nico Rosberg, I have to agree, because he was very quick. In his early career, even if you don't speak about him winning because he got lucky in the best car, he did some incredible things at Williams as well. I remember him putting many underdog performances, getting podiums. You could argue that he should have won Singapore in 2008 when Alonso won in Crashgate, because Rosberg was second that day in a Williams. So, yeah, good driver.
Yeah, I mean, as we say, he has a world championship and 23 wins. I'm also of the opinion that he was lucky to win that title. But then that's what happens in every F1 season. There's people that have more retirements, less retirements. Because it was at the end of the season, Hamilton's looking set to potentially win Malaysia and, take the title, and then he blows up, and obviously that's going to have a lot more attention than, say, for example, another title fight where someone conked out in the fourth round and people don't really remember it because we get to the end and, they just won or whatever. It's kind of seen in a different light, in my opinion, anyway. And there's a few others that agree with me. At FIFA NR6. Impressive at Williams and the only driver to beat the two most successful drivers of all time in the same car, obviously being Schumi and Hamilton. And then at Uzair Syed says, Nico Rosberg, underrated at Williams, managed to score podiums in shit boxes, destroyed Nakajima, beat Hamilton to a World Drivers' Championship, and he has 23 wins. And he was at Mercedes for how long?
Ooh, 4 years.
4 years? And
13, 14,
competitiveness, 3 years probably.
Yeah, you'd argue 3 years where he could... No, sorry, of course he was at Mercedes...
He was...
Sorry, yeah, he was in Mercedes in 2010. Yeah, so he had 3 years in essentially the hybrid era beast Mercedes where he just win everything.
The same amount as Bottas, and he has 16 more wins. So,
and also
that in itself shows.
Yeah, and Nico Rosberg, you have to give him credit for, even in 2010, he was putting in some great performances in the Mercedes when they weren't up there. He got their first victory. I can't remember if it was 2012 or 2011.
China.
Yeah, China.
Yeah, China.
2012.
That would have been 2012.
2012. Yeah. So, 2012 got their first win. And he had put in some very impressive performances when Mercedes weren't the dominant team that they were during that hybrid era.
Yeah, that was a ridiculous race. I remember that. They just kind of came out of nowhere, didn't they? They were really good in qualifying, I remember, but then they struggled in the race, apart from China, where Rosberg just literally flew away.
Yeah.
And then Schumi, of course, had a failure of some description, some of the worst luck I've ever seen, after having, as everyone said, loads of good luck in his career, or luck that he manufactured himself into good luck. But we won't get into that. That's another conversation. But yeah, I think Rosberg for sure is up there. Oh, for sure, Rosberg. I'm coming up with the for sures now, now that we're talking about Nico.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think it's one of those cases where you have to kind of realise, and you don't realise until they leave the sport, how good they really were. And I think the inner wanting us for him to take it to Hamilton every single time because that was the only person that could take it to him, maybe that was the reason for why we then had opinions of him saying, oh, he's not that great, is he? He can't really challenge Hamilton. But Hamilton could well be one of the, if not the best of all time. So you got to kind of rate him, haven't you?
Yeah, fair.
Tommy, your choice now. Let's go. Okay,
my choice is Robert Kubica. And he was a bit of a joke last year, unfortunately. Again, I'm going for more my era. Oh, there was another one that I was going to choose, but I thought I'd get absolutely roasted by you for. But we'll go into that later because a lot of people picked him as well. I'm sure you can guess who he is.
Interesting.
But yeah, Robert Kubica, he became a bit of a joke, sadly, last year. And I think for modern fans that are maybe just joining the sport, they will unfortunately remember him as the guy that drove at the back in a Williams not very well and got consistently beaten by his teammate. But in terms of when he was at his peak, he was so good. And I have many good memories of watching that kind of era and thinking that Kubica, just like Alonso, Hamilton and Vettel, when they got into F1, they joined F1 and they were quick straight away. They didn't need to have anything, they didn't need a top car to prove themselves or anything. They just got straight in and he was banging in some incredible results for BMW Sauber. And I will never forget that he almost won the World Championship in 2008. He could quite have easily done that had they not killed the development of the car to go for next year.
So you think underrated though? Does Kubica go down as underrated? Because I feel like there was a lot of hype around Kubica at that time, and the next world champion, and Ferrari having him on his radar, on their radar. Underrated?
Yeah, but he's not. The thing is, he doesn't. He's not highly rated because of what happened this season, and also, you'd argue that the hyped era is like Alonso, Vettel, Hamilton from that era, so he will be forgotten about, I believe.
Fair. All right, that's a fair point. And as you say, ridiculed last year, obviously, for how he was performing. But when you actually strip it back and look at exactly what he had been through and the injuries he had, obviously Williams have given him that platform to do it. So in some form, it's their fault as well for him being off the pace. But at the same time, the injuries. Like, if you just see him walking around, you can't believe that he's even able to drive a Formula One car, let alone drive it at the speed in which he was going, where, at times he was fighting George Russell, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And he will forever, for me anyway, be highly respected for just how he fought through his injuries and was back in a Formula One seat. Like, that's a special story in itself. So
hopefully people remember him for that and not the kind of joke.
Make sure you remember him for that. Yeah. Everyone listening or watching. There you
go. And then
right.
If they do, I will argue that he's not underrated. But if you remember him the right way, he will be.
A few fan picks. Rubens Barrichello as one of the most underrated. 11 Grand Prix wins and 68 podiums. At Odikionas says, Rubens Barrichello always being second option in a team, but great partner for Schumi and Button. And at Osleiles, being a Brazilian, I must say Rubens Barrichello here, people used to target him as the slowest Brazilian driver ever, regardless of his achievements in Formula One. Now,
that's a bit sad, really.
I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds savage if it is. He was against, in my opinion, the greatest of all time, and he wasn't really allowed to fight Schumacher either.
No,
so
I'd 100% agree with this one, because, and people will probably argue, well, what about Bottas then? But for me, Barrichello, was very impressive in his early career. I think he was the youngest guy to score a pole position, I think, in Jordan, when he was at Jordan. And I remember before he joined Ferrari, he was putting in some unbelievable performances in a Stewart, could have won a race and scored multiple podiums for him if it wasn't for the reliability. And when he was up against Schumacher, I think it's important to remember that he could push Schumacher from time to time. And this is when Michael Schumacher was in its absolute peak. And Barrichello did have some performances, like Austria when he was unstoppable and he got told to move out the way.
Yeah.
Eddie Irvine, for example, I never saw anything from Eddie Irvine where Michael Schumacher would have an off day and Eddie Irvine would just put in the most unbelievable performance. Same with Schumi's Benetton teammates. They were never really there either. So Barrichello did push Schumacher from time to time, and a lot more than any other drivers in Schumi's career.
Yeah, absolutely. He has to be up there as one of the most underrated for sure, because as you say, he was just seen as a second fiddle, but a lot of that was down to Ferrari not really allowing him to fight. Was always a number 2 in his contract. Schumacher led that team, and to some degree you kind of have to say, well, look, if you wanted to be more rated, then move on from a team. But then if Ferrari's winning all the time, do you want to move? That's, there's a lot of factors, isn't there, into Barrichello's career, but he's definitely a very talented driver that wasn't really given a shot at a title. Another one that, well, the fans have suggested, which I disagree with, but we'll go with it anyway. Nico Hlkenberg at RJO_79. Hlkenberg, because he's been in the wrong place at the wrong time and had some bad luck. The wrong place at the wrong time. What? 10, 15 times? Yeah. Like, how many times does he have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time for him to be almost, judged for the fact that he hasn't been able to turn these occasions, these crazy races into a podium? For me, look, he's had his chance. He's had more than enough opportunities. He's the longest driver to ever, or the longest serving driver to ever not get a podium, and it speaks volumes.
I think the wrong place at the wrong time comment, the wrong place tends to be the wall when when a podium opportunity is presented.
Like turning in too early at Baku, wasn't it? And he hit
all
his
these
wheels,
crazy races. He seems to essentially bottle his chance, and I'd argue that he's almost overrated because he is almost the name on everyone's lips when you say underrated F1 driver, yet hasn't really achieved much in F1.
He's overrated in the underrated category.
Exactly, because he's so talked about so much as underrated, he's almost overrated.
I agree. Sorry, Nico, but you had your chances. Right, next up, the Lord himself, Pastor Maldonado at Stella AS Pilot says, Lord Pastor Maldonado, F1 winner with a Williams, an all-round good guy. No, absolutely not underrated. Just had a decent car that time. I'm not putting him in the underrated category.
I think he's going to disagree. I think he's underrated. I think he's not as crap as everyone thinks. He's a bit like a Grosjean, really. He's very
crashed a hell of a lot.
Crash happy, but my word, he could be unbelievably quick. And if is a driver a bit like, so say Max Verstappen, because he's in a good car, he's perhaps been fortunate, and he's got a lot of good backing, that he's perhaps been fortunate that when he had his stage where he crashed 7 times in a row, I think it was, and everyone was on his back saying, this should be career over, crash step and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. He could pull it out the bag, and he was in a top car to be able to prove himself. Unfortunately, Maldonado, just because he's just in the midfield, he's only looked at when he crashes, essentially, but he did put in some good performances as well. And in 2012, a bit like Perez, he performed really well in that Williams when Bruno Senna was doing absolutely sod all. And he there were some races, I remember him, I think it was Singapore, he almost got pole, Valencia, unfortunately, Valencia, where he crashed into Lewis, so again, ended with a crash. But he was going for P3 for that move with Hamilton that everyone remembers. So,
I'm glad he did that, because that promoted Mr. Schumacher.
Oh, it did, didn't it? Yeah.
If I remember correctly. So that was a wonderful time. Thank you for crashing, Maldonado. I remember giving it the biggest fist pump. I was like, wait, hold on. If those two have crashed, Schumi's on the podium. I think someone was hunting down Schumi at the time, but he managed to get his one and only podium in his comeback, which was a glorious time. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think... He had one win. That's it. That was the only time he stepped on the podium. He had a great time in Spain. Sure. He turned up, had a fantastic race, fought Alonso off the whole time, but
he won in a... I don't know.
He crashed too much. He crashed so much. And you say, like, obviously, crash Stappen and all this stuff, but, look where Max is now, whereas Pastor, as you say, didn't have the car to perform and produce and make the headlines, but
I guess with these underrated things, it all depends what your memory is them. So if you're I'm not saying Maldonado was incredible and should have been world champion, but I'm saying he should be remembered for more than just the guy that was utter rubbish and crashed all the time when he won a race in a Williams.
All right, cool. He's a little bit underrated then. Okay.
Yeah.
Finally, and shock, this one's on the list.
Okay.
Is Damon Hill.
So I'm going to change my choice, because this is what I was going to go for. I was going to go for this one, but I was worried about being roasted, but now I don't care. I'm choosing Damon Hill as my choice.
Oh, okay. So you're changing.
Yeah.
Okay. From Kubica to Damon Hill.
Damon
okay.
Hill, yeah.
All right. So I think this is a more worthy one than the one you went with before. Sorry, which was Kubica. So. Okay, Damon Hill, 1 title, 22 wins. And some people agree with you as well, Tommy. Andy Gorman says, late to F1 and could have won championship in 94 if it wasn't for Schumacher's antics at Adelaide, and would have probably won in 97 if Williams kept him. Pedro Verardi says, everyone thinks that because he drove for Williams during the golden years, he won the championship. And Resist Stance says, clawed his way into F1 very late, thrown into a championship contending car with little experience, cheated out of 94 title, won 96, then neglected by Williams, almost won in an Arrows, won in a Jordan. Tommy, the stage is yours.
Okay, so it's a bit of story time now. So,
oh no,
fanboy time. Yeah, fanboy time. So growing up, I supported Damon Hill, as you'll all know, and I was 7 years old, maybe. And I supported Damon Hill because he won the first race I watched, and I am a glory supporting child. And for me, when I watched him and when I was a little bit older in my teenage years and stuff, I look back on when I understood the sport a little bit more. I kind of looked back on Damon Hill and thought, yeah, he's not that great, really. He won in a dominant Williams, and kind of he got lucky with having the best car, essentially, and wasn't particularly that special. But now I've looked back more and understood the sport more, I'd actually argue that he is underrated because of the things he did. And for me, the Williams, this was before my time supporting him, but the pressure he must have been under in 1994 to, let's not forget, he joined the sport quite late on. I think he was 30 at the time, so unheard of now. And he joined as a teammate, essentially as a number 2 driver, just like a Barrichello or a Bottas. And Senna dying in 1994, he was never, ever expected to win the title. There was no thought that he would ever be in a chance to win the world title. So the fact that he got into that final race and almost won the title, and I can't imagine the pressure the team must have been under. You know, it was a pretty phenomenal season that he had despite everything. And again, he won Williams. He was quite fortunate that he had a rookie teammate. Schumacher wasn't in a particularly good car in 1996, but then when he got back into a rubbish car, Arrows Jordan, he performed well. And I'd argue that if he hadn't have had that failure in the Arrows, that would be probably the greatest underdog win of all time in F1, because he was like 40,
Hungary,
he was like 30 seconds in the lead in an Arrows. You know, past Schumi.
I remember.
Unbelievable.
Well, I don't remember that specific race, but I remember playing it on the F1 games scenario mode, which I think I mentioned to you on that time when. But it was.
I think he's like a bit like a Rosberg. You could remember him for. So it's kind of going back to your, like, they're quite similar picks, I'd say. Because Damon Hill's another one where people will go, oh yeah, it was just a year where Schumacher wasn't in a good car and he had the best car. But I don't believe that's the case.
Fair. Your point has been heard. Oh my goodness me.
That was a big
heard. I won't argue because you know Damon Hill's career much better than I do. But you know, the book he wrote obviously is which I think you've read, haven't you?
Yeah.
I've seen snippets of it, you know, with what he was going through as well. And, you know, that obviously has to be taken into account as a human being and relating to the struggles he was going through as well. So for sure, I think he's never really in the conversations, is he, as one of those great drivers, but definitely deserves
exactly.
to be.
And that's what being an underrated driver is all about. You're not saying that they're the greatest driver to have ever lived. You're just saying that they deserve a bit more credit.
They deserve to be talked about. Absolutely. There you go. That's it, guys. Thank you so much for listening, watching, wherever you are, to this new format where we discuss topics around the Formula One world. Obviously, we've been discussing this one, Tommy, for quite a while, but we want to hear from you guys as to what you'd like us to talk about next. So we've covered off underrated. Do we go to overrated next?
Ooh,
who knows?
spicy.
Let us know in the comment section below or wherever you're listening. And that is it. We hope you're staying safe in these troubling times. It's hopefully going to get better soon. We don't know. Or wherever you are, it's obviously different, but we wish you all the best. And that is pretty much it, isn't it, Tommy?
It is. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed, trying something new. And there's a lot more to talk about in a subject like this than racing that's not happening. So, yeah.
Exactly. So there you go. Thank
content.
you so much, guys. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, should we wave? Should we wave to each other?
Oh yeah.
Bye. I hope I'm looking the right way because I've forgotten which way we were looking.
Cool. All right.
Bye.